When Ranger Elise Navarro's patrol vehicle was found locked and abandoned deep in Big Bend's desert, the only thing missing was her. No footprints, no struggle, no clues. But 2 years later, in a hidden mine shaft miles from where she vanished, investigators uncovered something far more disturbing. Her uniform, perfectly folded, and her revolver, empty. Her truck was locked. Her radio sat charging at the station. And 2 years later, buried in a forgotten mine 30 miles away, they found her uniform, carefully folded, and her service revolver with every chamber empty. Whatever happened to Ranger Elise Navarro wasn't an accident. It was a message. The alarm didn't begin with sirens or frantic calls. It began with routine. Panther Junction after dusk was a symphony of small sounds, the thump of logbooks closing, the muted chatter of shift change, the soft click of radios seeding into their docks. Outside, the Chisos cast long shadows over a desert that swallowed light and kept secrets. Inside, someone glanced at the charging rack and frowned. One slot still gleamed green. One radio hadn't moved. Elise Navarro's. August 5th, 2020. Heat ruled everything. Even as the sun sank, it pressed down, heavy and relentless. Rangers returned, signed off, headed home. But Elise, 51, precise, a veteran whose calm steadied younger Rangers, hadn't checked out. She hadn't called in. Her radio was still here. Elise didn't forget radios. She treated protocol like a promise. Supervisors tried her cell, straight to voicemail, which meant nothing and everything in a park where canyons cut phone signals into scraps. They traced her last assignment. Ranger Dean Rourke had relayed a minor report late afternoon. Supposed unauthorized campfire smoke near Mariscal Mine, a remote, unforgiving corner hard against the Rio Grande. Low priority, but policy said it couldn't wait. Elise overheard. "Quick, loop," she'd said. "In and out before the light died." Rourke mentioned she might have rushed to beat the dark. Maybe that's why the radio was left in its dock. Maybe. Patrol units rolled out along the bone-jarring track toward Mariscal, engines grumbling over washboard ruts, headlights catching mesquite claws in scattered stone. By the time they reached the approach road, night had taken the color from the world. Their beams washed over a familiar silhouette, a Park Service SUV, pulled neatly off the track the way Elise always parked on a stop. The doors were locked. The dust around it lay undisturbed. No drag marks, no obvious prints, no scatter of gear, just a truck that looked paused mid-thought and an emptiness that felt intentional. Back at Panther Junction, voices lowered. The missing person protocols came alive, quietly at first, then with urgency. A ranger was unaccounted for. A ranger who didn't make careless mistakes. At first light, the park woke to rotors. Helicopters beat the air into submission, pushing heat aside as they traced canyon rims and dry washes. Drones mapped the maze below in tight grids. Ground teams staged with grim efficiency. Water, med kits, comms, GPS, and patience. Stepping into a landscape where a wrong decision cost hours and sometimes lives. Heat rose into triple digits with mechanical certainty. August in Big Bend didn't forgive. Scent died on contact with sun-baked rock. Canine pads couldn't take the ground temperature for long. The teams moved methodically, eyes trained for anomalies, color against the scrub, a broken branch, an unnatural pattern in sand. Elise's nephew, Lucas Navarro, drove through the night from Midland and walked into the command post with a cop's focus and a family's dread. He brought context no map could offer. Elise's habits, her caution, her respect for this place. She knew the routes that looked easy but weren't, the gullies that trapped airless heat, the shade that moved too fast to trust. If she'd been injured, she'd have signaled. If she'd had to move, she would have left clues. The complete absence felt like a decision someone else made. Investigators pulled the thread that started it all, the smoke report. The more they tugged, the more it unraveled. Anonymous. No caller ID, no callback. Vague instructions. Mariscal area, Nothing more. Teams combed the supposed location. No ash, no soot halo on stone, no scorched brush, no trampled ring where someone might have stood watch. The ground was pristine. The call was a fabrication, which meant the meeting was planned, not chance. The border lay only a breath away. The river cut a thin line through a region big enough to hide anything. Smuggling wasn't a myth here, it was a variable. Drugs, guns, and people moved through the emptiness, following routes known to a few and suspected by many. A specialized border patrol unit picked up a cache a few miles from Mariscal. Water jugs, calorie-dense food, discarded clothing, cheap camping gear. It looked like a lead until the lab timed it out of relevance. Days too old, dust settled too deep. The path that had seemed promising dissolved under a microscope. The search contracted. Helicopters refueled and left. Foot teams rotated out. The desert resumed its steady breathing. Time became a weight. Days turned to weeks. The park's rhythm healed around an open wound. Nearly 2 years passed. The case thinned to paper, and then curiosity cracked the silence. 2 17-year-olds, Ethan Cross and Jordan Vale, the kind of kids who believed maps still held secrets, hiked illegally into the Chisos foothills. They weren't looking for trouble. They were looking for stories made of rust and stone. The ravine they chose narrowed around them until brush hid the sky. An entrance revealed itself the way old places do, when you're close enough to smell the cool air it exhales. The shaft had been swallowed by time, half collapsed, timbers black with age, rocks settling in slow motion. They rigged ropes and dropped into a vertical throat of darkness that ate their headlamp beams and fed them back as dust and silence. The floor pitched into a horizontal drift, a tunnel chiseled by hands long gone, littered with flakes of shale and abandoned tools. Halfway down, a pile of debris didn't look like a collapse. It looked arranged, timbers set with purpose, rocks stacked to hide, not to fall. They cleared the pile with the kind of patience that only adrenaline buys. A black industrial tarp slid into view, its plastic scraped and scarred, edges taped tight. They wrestled it into the open, cut the tape, and peeled back the past. A ranger's uniform, folded with care, tan shirt, olive trousers, campaign hat. Beside it, heavy and wrong in the beam of a teenage headlamp, an older model service revolver. The boys did something brave and simple. They put everything back as best they could, climbed into the light, found a signal, made a call, and waited. Investigators arrived, humidity in their breath, and rope burns on their gloves. The shaft was secured. The bundle was lifted with the reverence evidence demands. Under shade at the staging area, they examined what the desert had held. The nameplate clarified what everyone feared. Navarro. The revolver's serial number removed doubt. Elise's. A gloved hand broke the silence with a soft metallic click, the cylinder opening to reveal 6 empty chambers. Proof of action without context is its own cruelty. The paradox formed fast, a uniform folded like a ritual, a weapon drained with intention, and the shaft sat roughly 30 miles from where Elise had vanished, across ridgelines that broke ankles and washes that erased footprints within minutes. The uniform went to the lab. Under alternate light, fiber analysis, and microscopes, it spoke in negatives. No blood, no spatter, no tears from a fight, no bullet holes, no transfer evidence on the fabric, no skin cells, no foreign hairs, no latent prints on buttons or belt. Dust layered by time. The folding wasn't reverence, it was control. Someone undressed her with intention, searched for trackers, wiped surfaces, and concealed everything as if filing away a problem. Ballistics looked into the revolver's past. All 6 rounds had been fired. Residue patterns suggested timing consistent with Elise's disappearance, but exactness was lost to degradation. Elise Navarro did not empty her sidearm for noise or bluff. She fired to stop threats. The absence of any sign of a firefight at Mariscal made the riddle sharper. If she didn't shoot there, where were the bullets? And if she wasn't wearing the uniform when it all happened, why had she been forced to remove it? A confined space recovery team returned to the mine with patience bordering on stubbornness. They shored unstable ceilings, moved debris inch by inch, vacuumed fine dust, screened and catalogued. They mapped every void the tarp could have been shoved into. No remains, no slugs embedded in rock. The shaft was a vault, not a tomb. Distance re-entered the conversation. 30 miles in that terrain without supplies was a death sentence. 30 miles with planning, vehicles, and local knowledge was a route. The conclusion was unavoidable. Someone moved either Elise or her belongings, likely both, with coordination. This wasn't the work of opportunists. Border intelligence added a new layer. Between Mariscal and the Chisos foothills stretched a canyon network that didn't show up on tourist brochures but appeared in the memories of certain people. It wasn't a drug corridor lit by sensors and burned into algorithms. It was a human route designed to be quiet and temporary. Small encampments, false walls, cached supplies, movement at weird hours, strict discipline. In that light, the uniform's removal looked like procedure. Strip identity, check for trackers, reduce the risk of future detection, and bend a mind under the weight of control. The renewed search wasn't broad. It was surgical. Teams with climbing gear and steady nerves probed slot canyons so narrow they had to turn sideways to pass. Weeks in, one team slipped behind a wall of carefully arranged rock and brush and found a staging space. Empty now, but not long ago, it had held people. The signs were subtle but undeniable. Careful scatters of wrappers, water bottle caps tamped into dust, footprints flattened by time, but still readable as human, not animal. And at the back, on a clean face of granite, 6 scars. Impact marks, tight grouping, deliberate. Extraction took days. The heat punished tools and tempers. Rocks surrendered slowly around each embedded slug. One by one they came free, wrapped, logged, carried out like the small, heavy truths they were. Ballistics didn't hesitate. The bullets matched Elise Navarro's revolver. The story in those 6 impacts was clear and awful. No firefight, no traded shots, no panicked arc of bullets across a canyon. Someone stood at close range, pointed her revolver at the wall, and emptied it, neutralized, erased, and rendered harmless to those who now held the power. More than that, it muddied the trail for anyone who would come later, sending them in circles around a false assumption of where violence had happened. Investigators turned to the edges where modern life leaves traces, places humans think they move invisibly. Automated plate readers on highways that skim the park's perimeter. Entry logs, vendor manifests, way station numbers that don't care about stories, only mass. Out of that noise, one pattern solidified. A park-contracted waste removal truck entered the area early and left late on the day Elise vanished. The weight leaving was higher than the weight entering. Waste routes don't work like that. The truck's log showed a peculiar inefficiency, an unneeded loop near Mariscal without a scheduled stop. On paper, the trucking company was unremarkable. A small operation leaning on government contracts, a driver with no red flags big enough to wave. In context, with the canyon slugs, the mine bundle, and the phantom smoke report, that truck was no longer benign. It was a suspect with an engine. Lucas turned to what he trusted most from Elise, her notes. Decades in the park had taught her to write down the out-of-place. Short entries surfaced across months, sightings of that same waste truck in restricted areas, excuses about checking illegal dumping, idling near roads where it had no reason to be, parking near the river village without a work order on any schedule. Alone, they had been oddities. Together, they mapped a skeleton route only visible in hindsight. Surveillance began quietly and layered. Federal eyes braided with state patience. Eyes in the sky from a distance, tires on back roads, cameras that didn't blink, and people who knew how to be part of the scenery. The waste trucks moved trash according to schedule. They also drifted off plan in moments too consistent to be accidental. 5 minutes here, 11 there. Brief link-ups with other vehicles where no one lived and nothing grew. Midnight cargo transfers that made no business sense if the business was hauling reject. Fuse. Those threads drew a larger shape. They converged on private land outside the park, a ranch tucked into a basin walled by low, rocky hills and crowned with a single access road that turned to powder in summer and mud in storms. The name on the deed, Russell Kane. Wealthy by rumor, absent by design, and surrounded by systems that kept him insulated, fences with smart brains, cameras that could see heat as well as light, and men trained to make visitors regret visiting. The converted barn at the center of the compound drew particular attention. Trucks came and went. The timing was wrong for hay and right for secrets. Paperwork was neat where it should have been messy, and messy where it should have been neat. When the warrants landed, they landed before dawn, when the desert air was cool and breath made ghosts in front of mouths. Armored engines flattened washboards on the access road. Perimeter teams sealed escape routes with grim efficiency. Entry teams hit doors and hinges with tools meant for speed. Kane woke to lights he didn't own and commands he had to obey. Across the county, a knock turned to cuffs on the wrists of the waste truck's driver. Back at the ranch, the barn's reinforced doors fought, then yielded. Inside was a way station built from cruelty. Cells welded from heavy steel, matted blankets, buckets lined with plastic, faces blinking in shock at sudden light, children and young adults, their eyes sunken from dehydration, shoulders hunched from fear, voices too dry to answer questions quickly. The room smelled like captivity. The air carried the weight of countless hurried whispers. Agents moved with practiced care, separating, hydrating, calling in medics who knew how to treat bodies that had been reduced to numbers. Cameras documented. Notebooks caught names through translators who understood more than words. The search widened. Hidden compartments in waste trucks revealed their true design. Vented, insulated, configured for human cargo. Weapons wrapped in oily cloth. Cash vacuum-sealed against time. Radios tuned to channels that avoided attention. And in Kane's office, on a desk that looked more like a war table than a workspace, lay maps of Big Bend marked in a hand that understood patrol patterns. Alongside them, internal Ranger patrol schedules and radio codes that should never have left a government system. There was an insider. Interrogations began, where cooperation seemed possible. The driver's world had already collapsed. He could feel the weight of life sentences pressing down. Fear pushed him into words. The waste contract was the artery. The park's trust granted access that couldn't be bought any other way. The operation was years old, the kind that survives because it's modest in its ambitions and fanatical in its discipline. They moved people like inventory, never letting them become individuals until they could be sold as labor, or worse. When asked how they'd known when and where to move without being seen, he didn't hesitate. A ranger fed them information, patrol gaps, quiet nights, code changes, diversions that seemed innocuous to everyone except those who needed them to happen. Ranger Dean Rourke. The arrest at Panther Junction felt like a betrayal unfolding in slow motion. He didn't fight. He didn't explain. He stared past colleagues whose faces carried shock and fury in equal parts. When confronted with the documents from Kane's office and the driver's account, Rourke spoke 10 words that chilled the room. "You have no idea how far this reaches." After that, he retreated behind silence that smelled like fear. The driver kept talking. On August 5th, they were mid-transfer near Mariscal, using the waste truck's hidden compartments for cover. The smoke call Wong was theater, timed, targeted, and designed to bring Elise alone. She arrived as the loading finished. Armed men moved quickly. They took her before her weapon left the holster. The uniform came off under orders, hands searching for trackers, removing insignia, reducing her from authority to vulnerability. The revolver went with them to the hidden canyon rest site and was emptied into stone. 6 precise impacts that turned a weapon into a prop. She was forced into the compartment with the others. The way station near the perimeter recorded the truth in pounds the way truth sometimes insists on being recorded. Later that day, at Kane's ranch, Elise Navarro was executed. No last calls, no appeal to reason, just a choice made by men who believed systems and geography would keep them untouchable. The driver led them to a patch of ground on the property where the crust broke under a shovel like sugar. There was no ceremony, only procedure. A grid, careful scraping, a pause when something that wasn't earth showed itself. Beneath lay what remained of a ranger who had walked into the desert to do her job and met an organization designed to snuff out people like her. Prosecutions moved with unusual swiftness, given the complexity. The barn full of witnesses, the physical evidence, the paper trail, the bullets, the schedules, the maps, the insiders. Kane, the driver, and Rourke faced the gravity of what they'd built and what they'd destroyed. Convictions followed. Life sentences closed around them like the doors they had used on others. The desert holds its secrets, but it doesn't keep them forever. Sometimes it whispers them to teenagers with headlamps, sometimes to a forensic tech reading residue like runes, sometimes to a nephew who won't stop turning pages until ink becomes answers. In the end, it spoke loudly enough to bring a convoy down a dirt road before dawn, loudly enough to unlock a barn that had been a passageway for people stripped of names, loudly enough to put handcuffs on men who built a business out of shadows. What remains is a vow said quietly and kept fiercely. Rangers go out with radios checked and routes logged. Anonymous calls meet a wall of questions. Contractors learn that transparency isn't optional, and the park breathes, vast and indifferent and beautiful, while the people who guard it promise each other that indifference will never be mistaken for approval. Her truck was locked, her radio sat charging, and 30 miles away, in the dark throat of a forgotten mine, her uniform lay folded beside a revolver that had been forced to speak 6 times into stone. For 2 years, the desert kept that secret. Then, it told the truth. If this story gripped you, there's more beneath the surface. We're already following new threads, fresh interviews, overlooked logs, and the quiet details that change everything. If this is the kind of truth you want brought into the light, make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us keep digging, keep asking, and keep telling the stories others tried to bury. Keep watching the Witness Archives.